Welcome back to another Squid Game video, where today we will be answering one of the biggest questions I had while watching Season 2. Just like in the first season, where we saw the creator of the Squid Games himself, Nam, go undercover and pose as a random player so he could play in the games before he passed away. This season we saw the exact same thing happen, but for a different reason. While the old man, Nam, seemed to want to play in these games because he was at the end of his life and was simply bored, wanting one last chance to play childhood games he once enjoyed this season. Ho, or the front man, was inserted into the games after red light, green light finished. It seemed like he was on standby in case Ji-hun decided to try to disrupt the games, which he did multiple times on the first day. Because of that, Ho chose to join the games and once again pose as just another player, wearing the same number that Nam had. How Gi-hun didn't think twice about trusting number 1 again, I will never understand. Even after multiple red flags, like when Ho slips up and calls him by name before they formally introduce themselves, or how he immediately goes out of his way on day 1 to befriend him, or even when his best friend mentions that something feels off, Ji-hun, despite being traumatized by the first games, completely trusts the front man and believes he is just another player. But before the front man stepped in, there was a real player, someone who was already in the games. A player who, after the first game, simply disappeared, never to be seen again. You can actually see in the first game that player 1 survived red light, green light, which isn't an easy task. In Season 1, out of the 456 players, 255 were eliminated. That's 56%. If you want to know which game is the most dangerous, check out the last video, where we covered which Squid Games you should 100% avoid if you ever had the choice. But today, I want to focus on what happened to the real player 1. I took on the massive challenge of scrubbing through episode 3, frame by frame, logging every single player number I could distinguish. This was a huge task, taking over 12 hours of staring and counting the same numbers repeatedly, just to see if I could actually find who the real player 1 was. Because if there was a real player 1 and he survived red light, green light, what did they do to him? Did they give him a small percentage of the reward money as compensation for beating the first game and then send him home? Or did they simply execute him on the spot, take him to the incinerator, and then send the front man into the games in his place? Or what if there never was a player 1? Who's to say that all the players were actually in the games? I was curious, so I not only went through the entire episode and logged all the player numbers I could find, but I also took every wide-angle shot where the majority of players were visible and did head counts. I wanted to see if the reason I couldn't find a certain player was because there actually weren't 456 players in the games. And surprisingly enough, only 5% of the people who watched the last video were actually subscribed. That's such a small number, guys. What are you doing? Go down there and smash that button if you think Ji-hun should have been a little more suspicious of player 1. As we get closer to Season 3 of Squid Game, we'll be making more fun videos that you won't want to miss out on, so make sure you're subscribed. Now, back to player 1. I went through the entire red light, green light episode, removing scenes that didn't show any players like the frontman shots, the guards, and close-ups of Ji-hun. That left me with about 28 minutes of player footage. I then sat down, zoomed in on every shot, and wrote down every player number I could find. It may seem easy at first glance, but some of these shots are just a second or two long, with 100 different players visible. You count all of these, then cut to a slightly different angle where different players are visible, and repeat over and over again. From the moment Gi-hun wakes up until the end of red light, green light, there are 300 of these shots. By the end of my research, I was surprised at what I found. By the end of the first scene where players are introduced to the games, I could see 255 individual player numbers. By the end of red light, Green light. After adding more visible players, I counted 364 specific players. And by the end of the episode, with the voting scene included, I had logged 388 distinct players. That means that for 15% of the total 456 players, I was never able to find their numbers. And guess who was missing from all 300 of these shots? Yep, that's right, player 1. There were 68 players I couldn't find. And would you look at that, player 1 was nowhere to be seen? Where on earth was he? Did he even exist? What if the game claimed there were 456 players, but there were actually only 455? After all, who's going to take a head count or notice that one player is missing? So, my next step was to take a head count. Unfortunately, there was never a perfect shot of every single player, but some wide-angle shots captured most of them. As long as I could count around 455 players, that would be enough. I started with a shot in the bunk room, since everyone was neatly lined up. You could literally see all their faces, and it seemed to have almost everyone, minus a few on the sides. But when I counted, I only found 288 visible players. What the heck? That's nowhere near 456. Where was the other 40% of the players? Were they hiding under bunk beds? Using the bathroom? Just standing behind someone? This was concerning. So I moved on to the red light, green light shots. Unfortunately, there's no perfect angle that captures every single player, but some shots show large portions of them promising. It definitely seems like the majority is in this shot. But when I counted everyone up, I only found around 300 players. That's still 150 short. This was not going as planned. I kept searching and found the best angle I could. While there are obviously some players still out of the frame, it seems like the vast majority are in the shot. Plus, the far right seems to thin out with players, and it just feels like this is almost everyone. I counted through these and found quite a few more. There are 354 players in this shot, which is much better than 300. And while there are still about 15 or so off-screen to the right, there are still 80 players missing. Was there never actually 456 players in these games? I went back to Season 1 and counted in this shot, just to see how many there were, and I only found 290. There are a couple off-screen, but still, that's close to only 300. So, I got curious and checked sources other than the show itself. Netflix made a game show with 456 real contestants that competed in all the same games. Just look at these shots, you can really see how big 456 players actually looks. They tried to match the show's field as closely as possible, but it seems so much more crowded because there are actually 456 people here, compared to the 300 people we see in the show. You can really tell how big of a difference it is. Even Merbeast, when he had 456 people play red light, green light, you can see here that it looks like there are so many more people in these shots. Does this mean there are 100 people that don't play in red light, green light? It could just be that they only wanted to use 350 people to film in the actual scenes, because 450 might have been too many. I guess. But there are theories going around that more people than just Alnam and Inho were secret players that were actually VIPs. Some people think that player 388 was a little suspicious he wasn't seen in the first game of red light, green light. He's a main character in Season 2. We saw a lot of them get screen time, but was this the only one that didn't? I went through my notes, and I actually never saw player 388 in the entirety of episode 3. The first time we see him is in the next episode, close to when In-ho comes over and befriends Gai Hun. That's extremely suspicious. There's also a theory that player 149 is a VIP. She is the only known player to be able to sneak a weapon into the games. We know that the VIPs and special players have fail-safes everywhere to ensure their safety. Nam was the person that stopped the Midnight Riot in Season 1 when he felt unsafe. He was the only player in Tug of War that didn't have a lock on his shackles, in case his team lost. When he was eliminated in Marbles, it was in a secluded area that no one else could see. In Season 2, In-ho the frontman was in the last team to go in the pentathlon, just in case, for some reason, their team failed. Then, the guards could eliminate everyone in the room except for him. And maybe Gi-hun if they wanted to keep him alive, and no one else would ever know. It's extremely plausible that if 149 is a VIP, the hairpin weapon would be one of her safeguards. There are theories that a couple of other players are also VIPs. But what if this is true? What if there are a ton of special players that don't play in red light, green light, which contributes to the smaller player count? I do wonder because if you look closely at the player picture for number 1, it almost looks like In-ho. What if they intentionally used a player with similar looks so they could swap them out if needed? I'm sure that In-ho knew going into this game with Gi-hun returning that things would definitely be different. For all we know, this could be the first time ever that a returning player has come back and willingly wanted to play in the games. Who knows what could go wrong? We constantly see how prepared they are for things going wrong and how quickly they handle them. Even with the GPS tracker in Gi-hun's tooth, they were extra thorough in their check this year. Thanks to the captain who tipped them off. I doubt they're taking any chances with Gi-hun wanting revenge on the games. I'm sure that the frontman knew that if Gi-hun started disrupting this year's games, he personally would have to step in and fix the problem himself. I'm just genuinely surprised by how far Gi-hun got, even though In-ho was next to him the entire time. Now, as I was researching for this video, I found something really interesting. In the first game of Red Light, Green Light, we were questioning what happened to the real Player 1. The frontman, who becomes Player 1 after the second game, is still in the control room during the first game. And there is an actual Player 1 with his picture on the player board, meaning that there was a random person who was Player 1 for one game. And they actually survived that game. Then, since the frontman saw how much Gi-hun was disrupting the games, he inserted himself into the competition after Red Light, Green Light to do damage control. This means they must have eliminated and incinerated the original Player 1. It looks like they got someone with similar looks to In-ho, so they could swap them out, and no one would know the difference. Since the focus of Season 2 is on the players and the games, and less on the behind-the-scenes aspects compared to Season 1, they rarely show the player board this season. Besides the few times it appears during the first game, I only found one other moment where you can see the majority of the players. And if we zoom in and enhance, we can see that this is actually In-ho's player picture. Comparing it to the player picture from before Red Light, Green Light, we can see it's the exact same. This means that In-ho was planning on playing in the games before Gi-hun even started, and he simply chose not to play in the first game. This is literally the exact same picture. And here, he's smiling, playing the role of just another player. It's crazy that he was planning on entering the games before Gi-hun took control of the first game and saved so many more players from elimination. At least this confirms they never unfairly discarded the real Player 1. But it still surprises me that they knew before the game started that In-ho would play. While this theory disproves the idea that they got rid of a random player before In-ho joined, it still leaves a bunch of new questions open. Why are 100 players missing from Red Light, Green Light each year? And how many of them are VIPs or special players actually playing in the games? I really hope we get some context on In-ho's time in the games this year. I can't wait for him to come face to face with Gi-hun as the front man and for his true identity to be revealed. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe so you don't miss out, and I'll see you in the comments. Peace.